Yeah, I'm sure we could be discussing this for hours, and we'll have an opportunity also later with Michael. He's here until Saturday, I think, or Saturday.
Early, I have to be at the airport, like probably at 4 in the morning.
But okay, Friday, and tomorrow there's a round table, and we still have one question, but then we will need to give some time for the translators to take a rest before Vatmo, because they're doing their job the whole day, and probably they're really exhausted. So here is the other question, and I hope this is I think it's the last.
I have two questions, short ones. The first is the problem of the international system within which the socialist projects is supposed to be realized. For example, you have criticized Lenin several times and emphasized all the defects of his political project, but in a highly competitive international system with numerous political and concrete military challenges, it is hard to imagine, that is the question, how to develop in the direction that you have just described, especially regarding the need for creating an economically viable system in an extremely short time span that is a completely new, non-existent system being built through planned political action. So that would be the question. And could you relate this question to the concrete situation in Venezuela and to its foreign policy and its relation to the US, and the danger that a party that is a part of the modern international system necessarily develops some features of other political actors in that system? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to answer that. First of all, let me clarify that I was not criticizing Lenin in general and on the questions that you're posing. I was criticizing one particular interpretation in State and Revolution. You have to remember that Lenin took different positions at different times. He was a master of theorist of the conjuncture, of strategy. And in his work on cooperation, Lenin very clearly talks about how we can build on cooperatives. We can create a cooperative process by providing subsidies, favorable bank rates, etc., and we can build on them out. I think that the policies that were adopted under NEP, which were necessary, were in fact correct, decisions under those particular circumstances. And Lenin was very clear in saying, and it's a process of self-criticism, we have ignored the potential of cooperatives. So we have to, I want to be specific that this is one particular thing that I'm criticizing in Lenin, not Lenin in general. Okay, the question of the problem of an international system, I don't deny that, that under conditions in which you are, threatened with, subversion and worse, attack, you have to be able to deal with that. I completely reject the argument that was made in the Soviet Union in the NEP period, that there was an emergence of an internal capitalist threat. When you analyze who the kulaks were, about 30% of them were widows who hired wage laborers, to work their family, farms, and a very substantial portion of the wage laborers were in fact young people, about 15, who were working at that. There was no emergence of an internal capitalist threat in the Soviet Union, which necessitated the rapid, development of productive forces. But there was an imperialist threat. And that's the condition under which I think there was a justification of a big push. Whether that push was, self-defeating is another question, the way in which it was done, because after all, the level of farm animals, in the Soviet Union didn't recover to its 1928 level until the 1950s, because of all the destruction of productive forces that occurred in that process. So, but understanding the international process is a real threat, is a real concern. Concretely, what is happening in Venezuela? In general, let me talk about the internal and then the external issue. There is an attempt to build all three sides of that socialist triangle. There is, for example, definitely an increasing amount of state ownership. The state has taken firms and enterprises that were privatized and has renationalized them. Now, it's done this very easily because it had money to pay for it. These aren't, it's able to pay with the oil revenues, for retaking the steel industry, retaking the telecommunications industry, and all these basic industries that are now under state ownership. Furthermore, there is a definite emphasis and move toward worker management. And that's a big struggle in Venezuela right now, because the ministers in charge of state sectors and the state managers have sabotaged this, despite the fact that Chavez keeps calling, and responding to the demands of workers for worker management. And Chavez, responds and says that. And he said just in July, well, I can give you a little incident. Workers, there was a series of meetings in this area, a resource-rich area where there are a number of state enterprises. In the state of Bolivar, which in the area called Guayana, and there was a meeting organized by the planning minister and the labor minister for workers in these industries to meet to talk about what would be necessary to create a socialist economic plan, for this area. Now, that was instituted in part because after the nationalization of the steel industry, renationalization of the steel industry, because of the demands of workers, the workers immediately began to talk about, how they would have worker management. And our institute, which is the Centro International Miranda, we were running weekly seminars and round tables with the workers talking about planning that process. So the workers in the steel industry were pushing on this. So there was this meeting, a panel in which they had 10 work tables of the workers discussing problems of how they would create a socialist economic plan. And it was all on television when they made their reports. So one table after another would make a report saying, we have to get rid of these managers who are, in fact, fighting us. They are, in fact, people from the Fourth Republic. They oppose everything. They are anti-worker, etc. Everybody would cheer. The next table would come up and say, we have to nationalize all these intermediary firms, the briquette producers who are taking some of the outputs of some firms and then selling it to another state firm, and they're making the profits. They're creaming everything. We have to take them over. Cheers, And so and they got more and more radical, and I knew some of the people, who were making the reports from the table. So Chavez is sitting there. He's there. And he's taking notes, poker-faced, not a crack of a smile, nothing happening. And he gets up after they're all through. He thanks them for their contributions, and he says, "We have to nationalize. We're going to nationalize all those firms." Cheers. We're going to get rid of all these managers who are, in fact, thwarting this process. Cheers. I mean, the excitement was incredible. And suddenly the workers there, and there were, I guess, about 200 workers there, sort of break out spontaneously and singing the national anthem. And they all shout, "This is the way we govern. This is the way we govern." You get that kind of incredible process all on television. Now, ironically, you could see Chavez's speech with the reaction on YouTube. What you don't get is that he's responding to the demands made by workers, because the state, simply said, "Well, we're just going to show Chavez. That's what we'll put on YouTube." But so Chavez says, 2 months from now, you have a socialist economic plan. Okay, 2 months pass. The workers meet in their work tables, transcending firm, lines. So aluminum workers meet with steel workers on how they can integrate their enterprises. They're in a planning process. And what you, in fact, find then is a situation in which they come up with a plan, they send it up to the managers, and the managers sit on it. Nothing happens. And so the workers are getting very upset. This was in May last year. Chavez calls